Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, story changers, and welcome back to another episode of the Isolation Inspiration Interview series. And my word, we have got something special lined up for you in this episode. This was my first ever 2-hour interview. You might remember last week that the entire episode with Michelle Fulia also extended to 2 hours, but that was with the intro and outro and buffers and everything like that. This raw interview lasted 2 hours, never mind the bits and bobs that go either side of this. This was truly an epic conversation, and honestly, we could have gone on for another 2 hours. It was that engaging and fascinating. And normally I don't like bigging up one of my guests too much because I think all of the guests that come on the podcast have value, have their things to share. But there was something just truly remarkable about today's episode with Dr. Jacqui Taylor, and I'm sure you're going to start to appreciate that even as I start to read you her list of credentials and accomplishments. So let's get started. One of the 100 most powerful UK entrepreneurs, Jacqui Taylor was awarded an Honorary Doctorate of Science in recognition of her international web science work. One of the 250 founders of Tech City in December 2016, she pivoted her company, FlyingBinary, to meet the challenge of Brexit and the Industrial Internet of Things, IIoT. Remember that acronym, with spectacular results. Jacqui was recognized as one of the 100 global leaders in 2019. Top 10 global IoT, that's the Internet of Things innovators, and is an independent industry analyst for IoT. She is one of 4 IoT leaders advising the European Commission on their citizen strategy for smart cities, one of the UK's most influential women in tech, the most influential web science researcher in 2019, top 34 IoT influencers on Twitter, named one of the 20 global entrepreneurs to watch, and a UK smart city leader. She was shortlisted for a cybersecurity industry award and invited to speak in Davos on the future of the cybersecurity industry. Jacqui is also globally recognized as a Smart City Tzar, a strategic advisor to the UK government, the city's lead on digital built, and the principal UK expert lead for BSI International Team for Smart Cities and AI. Jacqui created CyberSafe to share the secrets of her Brexit success plan with entrepreneurs via a unique membership offering. CyberSafe launches in 2020. Now the UK has exited from the European Union and will give entrepreneurs resources to meet the challenges of transition, and the IIoT, I told you to remember that acronym, is based on a proven Brexit success plan. In this interview, you will learn so many things I can't even begin to summarize, but let's have a shot. Some of the things that you're going to learn are that the institutions we have relied on for so long are now finished. That impatience is not a bad thing, how we can collaborate better in the future, and why coronavirus will be the making of the next generation. And Jacqui has some really interesting data that she can share as to why that is. So without any further preamble and hype, I just want to leave you to enjoy this astonishing conversation with Dr. Jacqui Taylor.
I think that we all have a family setting that influences what we do and sets our start of our journey, but mine was an abrupt start. At 16, on a pathway that was fairly common and normal, my mum suddenly died, and I effectively had to interrupt my own education in order to keep my family together. That meant a 3-year gap in the traditional education setting until I could get onto my degree path, because my priority was sort of standing tall for my family so that we could stay together. Having lost one of the key members of our family, it was important the three of us stayed together. And so I ended up with having taken a summer vacation job when all was rosy. That actually became my start of my career. It happened to be in an aircraft factory, not exactly where I'd imagined I would start. But interestingly, my father was an engineer, so I had some engineering understanding, but I found myself completely fascinated by the whole process. So the company itself was great because they understood my family circumstances, and that allowed me to, having failed all my my O-levels or GCSEs as they are now, actually over the year period to acquire the things I needed to set a career off. And that career was in aerospace, not that was where I was intending. So I think for me, that set me off on a path that was unexpected, but it also formed the character that I feel I've developed in my approach in life. And that's one of courage. So in terms of where did I start, I learned that courage is my sort of foundation for everything I do. So being bold and just imagining what you would want to do within a large organization was an early beginning that I feel actually allowed me to explore the world in a very different way. And what I do today, I would say that's its origin, from circumstances that nobody would want to start with. Actually, it's unfolded me in a different direction because I've had to be resourceful from effectively ground zero and start again. So that's my answer to your question.
Yeah. Where did you see your life going?
So I thought that I would I was somebody that was in a very large Irish Catholic family, big sense of community. So I actually thought I would travel. I thought that's what I was going to do. I had no fixed idea about what I wanted to do, but I was born into a large community and thrived in that, and kept my place in that, and often didn't. But I was allowed to explore. When you're part of a large family like that, there isn't a role. You can just morph into what. So I wanted to explore the world. So I honestly expected not to be living in the UK by the time I was 20 and literally trotting around the world doing whatever. I didn't really have any ideas about what that might be. I would just say I'd just adapt. And so the idea that I was in a fixed place with no career path, no examinations behind me, and having got to sort of 16 years and effectively let's start again, let's scrub everything and start again, that was a hard road to know where to even start. So I started by acquiring the exams I'd failed while I'd cared for my mum before she died, and then said from there, because I was within an organisation that supported me, okay, what is it you need? And what I learned was there's engineering as a discipline is something that takes many people to collaborate. So in the same way I grew up in a family that was quite a complicated, very large family. In order to put a plane in the sky, it takes a very large community to do that too. And there are so many things that you have to contribute as skills. So I ended up with this entire feast of options, all within an engineering setting. But actually, what did I like? What do I want to do? So I did explore. I just explored it in a single place as opposed to the world. But I did actually, and in fact, because I thrived in that environment, because in a sense that was a large family, everybody was an engineer, and so there was everybody I could learn from. I actually explored the various things I was doing, and because I wasn't wedded to do one thing or another, I was very successful. And over the first 3 years, while I attained my examinations to get me through GCSE and then effectively my A-levels to give me a degree option, I literally worked every 3 months in a completely different part of the organisation and solved today's problem. So whatever, you know, it might be the equivalent of on Monday, I would start in a new department where there was part of the part of the manufacturing process for, say, a wing of an aircraft that wasn't working. In you go, Jacqui, Monday, find out what it is that's the problem and get it fixed. And there's no sort of wrapping in an engineering discipline. You've just got to get in there, you know, usually very dirty, with all men. So being the only female is something I'm quite used to, and just get in and find out what it is and fix it. So I became a problem solver in quite a complicated environment. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So by the time I actually did come to do my degree, my family was stabilized to some extent, but actually wouldn't have coped with me leaving home as you'd expect to do when you go to university. And essentially I needed to stay locally. So I negotiated a different sort of contract with my employer to say, could I study part-time in the factory? So could I do some of this as an accredited thing? And could I do some of it actually in a university setting? And the answer was no idea, but let's see. So my year before I did that, effectively they put a scheme together, and I was the first one through that scheme. And what that gave you is applied engineering expertise, but then the academic study as well. So that was the first time vocational and academic study in the aerospace industry was done. And in fact, each year after me, somebody else was sponsored to do that type of education, because what they found was they got very practical people out of it who weren't academically minded, just academically minded, but actually could do it in setting. And so to whiz forward to the end of that, as part of the new wind tunnel testing that we were doing to solve noise pollution in our cities, because aircraft noise was a problem even back then, I actually put the business case together to put a brand new aircraft into production, which was an amazing opportunity. So my dissertation was marked under arm guard and then went into the boardroom for approval, and it did do. And what that was amazing, because that's my new career, isn't it? It actually wasn't, because what happened then was, and of course I used to change by then, but what happened then was the first off-plan orders, which usually you didn't get for an aircraft that was already in production, never mind one that wasn't, was from a Middle Eastern customer, and no women were allowed on the project. Yeah. So that was the end of my engineering career. But throughout the whole process, I've been learning about IT, because that was just coming in and we were starting to industrialize the engineering process. And my MD was a pilot friend of mine, really great guy. And he said to me, you know, I could really do with finding out what the heck these people do. But he was an engineer as well. He was a test pilot. And he's like, could you explain to me what these people are doing, so that between us we can figure out what it is we need to change? And that was that led to the development. It was one of the companies that created the software engineering industry. Actually came from an engineering discipline, because we literally, when I found out what the computer people were doing at the time, it was like, oh no, if I did that on a production line, I'd have aircraft falling out of the sky. You're not doing that. So I started to understand they had no structure, they had no discipline, and they were making aircraft. It was like, how can that be? So I was part of the team that pioneered software engineering. So again, problem solving, what do you need to do? Because I had my engineering background, it was like, well, okay, I understand what you're all building now. Something slightly different to what I'm used to building, but actually you need to do it in a different way. So that was my introduction to the idea that change can be done at a really fundamental level if you're part of a talented team. So again, that sort of community piece and that collaboration piece, but actually you could change an entire industry, because there were teams. This company pioneered the idea of being able to have a software set of solutions that allowed a company to change the way it operated. So we could literally build more planes faster, safer, all the rest of it. So we became very successful as a company. And I was told if I waited 5 years, they'd promote me into the role I was actually doing, because I was just too young in my 20s to do that job. So obviously I left. I was headhunted into the energy industry, actually into the gas industry, because again, that's an engineering, well, part of it is engineering. Yeah. I pioneered the first, it was the first setup where we use we would use IT to completely automate what at the time was billing. So you get your energy bill of any kind. That was the first time we'd use machines to collect and manage that whole process. So I was with a team of engineers, I headed that up, and we actually worked out how you got from a meter in your house through to a bill back to your house, and that machines were doing most of the work. So it was the first time that mobiles and PCs and mainframes were all put together. And that was fascinating, because that showed me not only could you solve complex problems, you could solve an entire value chain problem. And I would say that's a very interesting experience that I've got, because now with the work I do today, I'm an expert advisor to the G20, which is 60% of the world's GDP. And so I have no qualms about walking in the door and looking at that, all their plans, all their digital economy plans, and say, okay, what I've got is a kit of bits that don't fit together. How do I solve that problem? Quite confident about going into that. So I think one of the things about that early start of the complete sort of sea change of having to start again was never be afraid to actually reset. That's always fine, because you're more resourceful than you know, and where you don't, where there's a gap, you'll get up and you'll find that gap and you'll understand it and you move forward, but always from a point of collaboration. So for me, today I'm one of the top 10 global Internet of Things innovators, and the thing I say all the time is we've had a competitive world and we have a collaborative world for the Internet of Things, because it's an engineering challenge. So I now get to go full circle back with my IT to say an engineer can do this for the simple reason that that's the challenge that has to be solved. And so behind me, I mean, David will be able to see here, behind me there's a little sign that says empathy economy, which is the way in which our society is built, enabled with technology, which is what I do, build that technology, but actually built in a collaborative way and built on a philosophy of empathy. And because of my journey, I found that the things that have sort of turned the handle for me when I've been confronted by enormous problems have been that collaboration, but underpinned by an empathetic approach. And that's just, from that original journey, which I never really think about, and I don't think I've talked about for forever. Those are the threads that thread it through today, to be able to put the empathy economy on the table for the G20 and say, this is the new plan and this is how we'll do it. And for people to say, that's a cracking idea, now where do we start? I mean, that's so very small beginnings, but being resourceful, but being bold and courageous. I do think courage has a lot to do with our journey. And people said to me yesterday when we were dealing with a counter-terrorism incident, it's scary. I said, if you're not terrified, you should be. So actually being terrified is okay too, because we're at our human best when we're doing things from the right intention and looking to contribute as part of a cohort or a collaborative group to a solution. And, obviously the times we're talking now as well, David, that's probably more important than ever, to be able to say, well, almost it's values that are going to drive us forward, and understanding that the collaboration that I've talked about have always been with people that have got similar values. So for me, that's been one of the keys. Find those people with those values, collaborate, don't compete. And currently, I've my work has changed has made a positive impact to over 60% of the economies of the world. Obviously, I know that there's 40% to go, and I've been having conversations about that today. I'm not going to slack on this one. But because it's an engineering challenge, because technology is going to be the enabler, a lot of it is to do with what sort of society are we building, and the human has to be at the heart of that. And I would say that defines my work today.
You've used this term collaborate or collaboration a number of times, and I think collaboration has become a bit of a buzzword nowadays, and a lot of people throw it out because it sounds nice, and they say, let's collaborate. And what they really mean is, let's see how much I can get out of you for giving away as little as I possibly can.
Yeah.
What do you think are the keys to good collaboration?
So I think one of the issues, I completely agree with that statement. One of the issues are the actual business models that operate. So when you're going to work with somebody, which is what I think collaboration is, I think of it as a partnership model. But often the world that you're describing, which is the norm, is that the business models that operate are very different. And in a hierarchical organization, whoever that individual is in that organization, it's competitive. Whereas my organisation, we formed FlyingBinary 10 years ago to disrupt the banks, and we've done it every year since then with their blessing and their cash. But we set up as a meritocracy. So for us, it's about, it's a team effort, because quite frankly, it's quite hard what we do, and we need all the skills of everybody. And so we can't start what we do as a company in any way that's competitive, because no one of us has the skills to do that. And the world we build in and the world we build for is very complex. Whereas a lot of what's the legacy of the way in which business world works are those hierarchical models. And I have 27,000 CXOs, leaders of organizations that since December 2016 I've been working with. And one of the first things I've had to change, if you're going to work with me, is your business model. Now, obviously, they can't go, okay, I'm going to scrub this organization of, 300,000 people out. They have to understand what that means. But very often, the talent within an organization gets it. The leadership doesn't always. And also, there's, it sets the example, but it also sets the tone. So I think leadership is a key to collaboration. And if somebody tells me they want to collaborate, or they don't usually use the word partner, which I think is generally my word, then I'll listen to the language. And if it's not a language of leadership, I'll already be tuned into, you're out for what I can give you and what you can get, as opposed to what you can contribute. And so as a meritocracy, we keep each other accountable because we're accountable to one another. So any decisions we make are all hands decisions. Everybody gets involved. Now, obviously, as the co-founder, myself and my CTO, who's the other co-founder, we get to decide. Often I get to decide, but I will always do it in the knowledge of that collaborative thought process. And I suppose I use that word a lot because I live that word. That is my, I find there's a language around what we do, around the business models. And so sometimes what I'll do with a new CXO as I onboard them is I'll get them to describe to me their biggest pain point, their current challenge, where they failed, all the things that look at the way in which us as a human reflect on where we are, where we've been. And often the vocabulary, the actual language tells me where they're at. I don't need to ask whether they'll collaborate, because they use, even especially in a leadership role, they use a language and a vocabulary that doesn't chime with what they say. And particularly if you get them to focus on where they are and where they've failed and not where they've succeeded, that does often show you the essence of what's going on. And obviously as a female in that world, that's tough for them, really, because I don't look at things the same way they do. And so I find it, my whole philosophy is around the whole us moving together as a society. I'm an international web scientist, and that's when we founded this company was about. So for us, I can boil it down to, it's about inclusion, leave no one behind. That doesn't mean everybody can step forward at the same time, though. You do, you make choices, people come and on board on what you're doing at different points. But if we can say our mission is inclusion, leave no one behind, then that usually allows us to make good choices around collaboration. And if I miss something, then there's plenty of people who go, what were you thinking? And I think, yeah, what was I thinking? Because you've got to be able to question yourself, and it's got to be open scrutiny, but in a very open environment. And I think that's the interesting thing around leadership. I do believe when we formed FlyingBinary in 2009, we deliberately built our technology for Generation Z, who at the time were were 17 to 7, and we were building it for that cohort of young people who use our online world in a very different way. They're 27 to 7 now, and our customer base is effectively Gen Alpha, and they're 16 to 6. So we've moved our company and who we build for and who is the dominant customer voice into the new cohort. But Gen Z steered as well. And Gen Z in 2020 they influence 40% of the economic spend. So, one of the ways in which you can go to the G20 and lay down a plan is say, there's 40% of the world you're ignoring, not voices you should ignore, and present the evidence. We have technology that connects to every person that's connected on the planet, and we went out to 2 million of them and said, this is what we want to know. These are our questions, which in our counterterrorism world is called the wicked question. I have no idea what the answer is. It's an unknown, but you out there in the setting understand. So help me understand how I should focus and what that should be. And that's jaw-dropping when you can drop evidence of 133,000 young people across the world that can tell you where you've gone wrong, to the last full stop. And there's no answer to that. And not usually voices anybody listens to, but once you bring them in full force and you demonstrate it, I know because I have the data, these people have spoken directly, then it's fairly irrefutable. And you can argue about the semantics, but not about the actual issue of it. So I think for me, collaboration is just the way we live. I live my life, but the way we build what we do and my whole approach to things. But I recognize what you asked, because I think that's the hangover for, a Gen X and a baby boomer generation, where the command and control war was necessary because of 2 world wars and a Cold War. And Gen Y, who was the first generation that said, whoa, wait, what do we do? And then millennials, who obviously the more dominant population online for now, who have really lived in a form of freedom. And so that the command and control world has used this as a break, and it has been competitive. Well, it has if you allow it. But in my world, it's like, just signal to me who you are, and that helps us decide that we don't want to be there. And there's many that change their minds, but the reality of it is, who you're dealing with. The language is the clue for me always.
Yeah, I found it interesting talking about language. I've been looking at my language recently, and in particular my language around emotions and how I label emotions and how I judge emotions. So something that I've been working on recently is my language around emotions, and even things like I have categorized emotions into positive emotions and negative emotions. But why are those positive and why are those negative? So this is something that I've been doing in a slightly different context. Actually, you've been talking about leadership language. I'm talking about emotional language just now. But come back to what you were saying. What language triggers do you have, and how could we take what you've learned into our general lifestyle? What sort of language is a bit of a red flag when you're speaking to someone? This can be in general as well as in your organizational work.
Yeah, so I think in general, because actually the more you work with somebody, you do get the personality shine through. It's very difficult to mask yourself. I mean, I know there are people that do that, but the majority would find that hard as you build a relationship. So it's actually the singular versus the plural of anything. So somebody who says we, as opposed to somebody who says I, then you can understand intention and motivation from just something as simple as that. But the one I use more all the time is body language, because 70% of all of our signals are nonverbal. And I particularly, with Generation Z, the reason I did what I did and we set the company up is I pioneered a change in our education system in the UK and took the education regulator to court and won on behalf of our young people that have learning differences. And so verbal language is not something they share. And non-verbal is actually the key to understanding and supporting those young people. And so I had to learn the language, the body language, the non-verbal language. And so if you're confronted by me, it's quite hard usually, because I'm not necessarily listening to the words, but I'm listening to what you're saying, which is an ancient language across the millennia that really we're often unaware of. And my go-to guy on this is a guy called Alan Pease. He did the original body language research. I've done some work with him over the years, and particularly because one of my areas of specialty is dementia, where so having done the work with the younger cohort, it enabled me to look into acute clinical areas where language is lost. And therefore, you don't have any other signals like you would with a baby. But again, in dementia, the faculties deteriorate in a different way. And so a lot of what Alan does in his original body language book, and he's got many more books from there, all of which I recommend, that he teaches us about how we are human. And so nonverbal, I find that I read that, and I'm not necessarily always doing that because I'm deliberately doing it. It's just those signals are quite, because I'm experienced and I have expertise in that, those signals are actually quite loud for me. So even if somebody's saying something to me, they can be denying it with the way their body language is. So I find that one of the keys, and most people don't use it. And often the reason I like it lots is because our young people that I work with across a spectrum of 50 learning differences, I found a core way to support those young people and help what we do as technologists to build for what they need on our online world. That I have to be able to find a way of understanding how to support them via their expression. And again, that nonverbal helps me at least narrow down options, and I can give them something and they can tell us. But a young man in Japan who I've not personally met, but read all the works that he's done, and particularly his book of why I jump. He's a complete nonverbal autistic young man, and he's written a book. And so that's because his mother developed a language based on what I'm saying here, where he was able to communicate inside the mind of an autistic human who has no verbal skills, what it's like and how hostile this world is. So I think that's one of the interesting language pieces. But emotions is a very interesting one, because one of the things that we've had to look at is, in terms of trying to understand how do we focus, what is our focus? We have 34 million people across the world that we ask these wicked questions to. They contribute to what we do on a daily basis. We can contact them all directly, etc. And that's great, and a great big research group. But actually, sometimes you want a specific thing you want to know about. We have 3 choices here. Which ones should we take? We're web scientists. We're largely the company of engineers, so we're not likely to know. So how do you choose? And we would keep going out and speaking to people. So if it was something that was that we were looking to deploy, say in Asia, then we would concentrate on that part of the world. But then we found that Norway had something to say that was also meaningful. So that got messy. So now we have an artificial emotional intelligence engine, because what we find is that scale, human emotion, is actually very rich. So we ask people to respond to something we're looking at. So it could just be, say something, Jacqui, that's not going to get you into trouble. It could be to understand, for a manufacturer, they've developed a product which is bombed. For whatever reason, it's hit the marketplace and everybody hates it. They've no idea why. And so, I'm thinking of a particular use case here, a particular problem that a manufacturer came to us and they said, why? And we said, no idea. We could ask. So we asked people across the world, like I said, ask the wicked questions. But we got lots of mixed answers. That didn't mean anything. So one of the things we did was built this engine to be able to say, well, all the voices across the web, across the world, which we interact with to do some of our foresight in what we call our web observatory. How about if we could train a machine to say the human response to this is, and so basically the machine trains on 2 billion data points every day and understands it understands all 27, but 20 of the 27 human emotions actually are dominant across a world where the human is at the heart of what people do. The other 27, our friends in the criminal world, understand. The other 7 understand very well. So we use that on those occasions, but predominantly we're focused on those 20. And actually, one of the things that's very interesting is that when you can interpret something at that scale, often you can send signal for where somebody is slightly off track. We just 1 degree off track, which a year later gave us a bomb in the market. The product just doesn't relate to anybody, and nobody can seem to find out why. So at a human level across the planet, we have over 50% of the world connected now. We actually have a resonance of our emotions. Interestingly for me, when I look because we build for our young people, the dominant voice that's missing out of our culture today is the voice of young men. And in our other work, those are the same young men who are being radicalized. So actually, if you look at across the human cohort about what we would look as an ambition, what we would look to achieve, how we perceive our place in that, our emotional response to it, then actually you can understand how you can help, or in our case, what technology needs to know to do. And so we don't have to guess anymore. We can ask the planet, how does it feel about this and why? And then what you can do is get humans that care about the answer to look at the output. Because then we only ever use artificial intelligence in what I call advisory capacity. So humans have to be at the center of this empathy economy. And so a machine can consume and crunch all of this and come to an understanding based on how it's trained. But then a human looks at that and says, if that matters, why does it matter? And in what way would it matter? So actually, I can see how the population of a country C are having a problem with this, whereas in country M, they're not. Because actually, the resonance of the human emotion is different. So it's something that consumes me, this whole emotional intelligence piece. And quite frankly, we would never have got the research base this far without the AI, because it's impossible to build tech that can crunch stuff like this, and you need something that learns. And so if actually we can sort of assemble an understanding of a human response to something, then the technology we build is more likely to be resonant with the cohort we're aiming for. So whenever we do this work, we always go across all the cohorts. So in any country, say we're looking at country M again, then we would know that, say, that was perhaps an older generation predominant there with a large millennial population. Then we can configure what we do with that in context. So make it context specific. But at a planet level, we can say the emotional intelligence response to this is this, and that then allows us to look at how we might configure the technology, or how we might build the technology to support that. And I can tell you that the human response to life and the human sort of way and the society we can create is very positive about the piece. Interestingly, though, 37 and under. So 37 and under, largely, that's a very global piece of information across the 2 million that came into that study with us. 37 and under, hugely positive. And don't know why we're just taking our time and dragging our feet. Why aren't we just getting on? Which I love the sort of slight impatience in it. Not slight impatience in some cases, impatience in some cases. But I think that, our current situation with this crisis that is a global crisis, some of that impatience has been a driver to change, where we've seen that empathy economy that I always talked about actually come to the fore, because as people have understood their place has been destabilized enough to have to think again, then when they've done their reboot, it's been, be kind is a phrase that RAI tells us about every day, because be kind is the dominant set of words that are out there. Yeah. So I think it's very interesting that you're studying that, or you're looking into that, because that is the essence of, we have an opportunity to leverage technology to build a different world. Let's build one we all want, which is hence the name, the empathy economy. But that is driven by human emotion and not necessarily the basis on which it's been before. I mean, that's our opportunity, isn't it, to reconfigure.
I'm intrigued. You were talking about the 20 and the 7 emotions, and the criminals are very adept and familiar with these 7 emotions. I don't know if you're allowed to say this or not. Are you allowed to tell us what are these 7 emotions that criminals in particular are fascinated with?
Well, it's not so much that. It's not so much the particular 7 emotions, because emotions are generally combined. You don't have a single emotion. Right. So I haven't got anything in front of me to refer it to, but often you get human emotion of surprise, which is made up by the fact that you're presented with something as a human, you don't know what it is, and so there's a shock factor to it, which often people label as a negative emotion, but actually the human emotion is surprise. That's one of the 20. But obviously the underlying piece of shock is part of, understanding the other 7. And the interesting thing about it is what underpins it all is intention. So you can often, when you look at what I call the value chain, you look at the origins of some of this, the subject you're discussing, the value chain and the process it takes through from a human point of view, it's often intention that you can infer outcomes. And then obviously you do the evidence base to see whether that's right. So not so much predicting things, but understanding intent underneath those mixture of emotions. But in order for it to be consumed by people that are not scientists, we literally have been using the icons that Facebook use, because actually everybody gets those, even if you're 2, because that's what they get it. And so actually that's, the language of symbols, if we go back to ancient times of hieroglyphics, the language of symbols actually does accurately represent it. And I think that from that point of view, you can say, well, if we understand that human response, and often it's where something resonates. So we tend to, as a human, look for the things we understand and look for evidence that aligns with our perspective, because we don't like to be wrong, and we, birds of a feather flock together, all that stuff. And so actually you can get to that by understanding at scale, i.e. what the planet's talking about today, what the planet's feeling today. Then you can actually understand the human condition beyond that. But because in a particular setting you have to tune some of that out because it's just not there, I would say the distinction is intention rather than the emotion.
Right, got you.
And I think one of the things I should say at that point is Tim Berners-Lee, who's the web scientist that got me into being a web scientist, one of the things he said at the very beginning, which I've never forgotten, is the World Wide Web has a fabric of permanence. Nothing gets deleted. It's always there. And so we effectively have a digital shadow of ourselves, of every interaction we've ever done. And that is part of what I'm talking about, building that understanding of that human resonance based on the digital shadow that's left as we use whoever we are and whatever we're intent on doing and make our way in the world. And that's the piece that fascinates me. This is sort of an area of study that's definitely a core area of study for me, and earned me an Honorary Doctorate of Science. So I stood up at the graduation ceremony of the engineers where I received my Honorary Doctorate and said, even if you scraped your way through your GCSEs and you scraped your way through your A-levels, I didn't actually scrape my way through there, but then you got through your degree with all the troubles you had, you still get your PhD in the end, because actually somebody says the work you did is equivalent of, and actually we're going to honour that. So I think that, a lot of this has been a core sort of almost approach I've had to try and understand what's my contribution. What piece of this puzzle that is me helps to understand that? What's my magic? What's my superpower? And whenever I'm mentoring entrepreneurs, if somebody's lost their way a little bit, they've got distracted or away from their own superpower, and their passion isn't what they do. Whereas for me, what we're talking about this piece is I have an unfailing faith in the way humanity is moving, despite everything, even despite today. Because if I have a problem with that, I can go out and speak to over 50% of the world and be reassured. But I think we all, because of the current situation, have seen the response of humanity to what is, for most of us, nothing like we've ever seen.
Yeah.
I've today put a community of, I've handed over my community responsibility to support 34 communities across the UK who deal in very difficult circumstances, and put together a proposition for communities, 2,000 people locally, to be able to co-support one another using tech, obviously. And there was one lady today who said to me, "But my dear," which I find that as of a certain generation, they say, "My dear." But my dear, what you're saying to me is all these people with their apps and their groups and what have you, and they have phones in those things, do they? I mean, they do. She said, "But I'm after helping them." She's 93. I said, "I do really understand that, Joan, but what I'm saying to you is we will call you. We've got your number. You've got our number. If you need anything, you call us, but we'll call you if we need you." She's of that generation, but my dear, I've been in a place where things were much worse than this. And it's great all you youngsters are doing this stuff, but the reality of it is it could be much worse than this. We're ready. And I think, crikey, we can learn a lot from somebody like her. But the thought of this 93-year-old going around knocking on doors, checking if everybody's okay, it's like, yikes, that would be on my watch if that happened. I'd find the police at my door going, "What is going on around here?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm not sure." So we've all said how marvelous she is and what have you, and we're all thinking, "Oh, I hope that works." But I've actually had 2 phone calls from her already to check in that I'm doing all right today. So I think the whole piece of this is we're bringing out the good in humanity, but I see that most of every day in the work that I do.
Yeah. There was something you said earlier that I really resonated with, where you were talking about this under 37 impatience and why can't we just do it? Why can't we just get it done? And that completely clicked for me as a millennial, I'm 28 this year. So I'm pretty much I'm at on the
cusp.
On the cusp of millennial sort of Gen Z, because I can kind of see a little bit into both worlds.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I've always considered impatience to be something that I've got to be careful of and manage.
All right.
But when you said that, I actually saw it the opposite way around, that perhaps my impatience and my generation's impatience actually gives you a drive to do things.
Definite.
And that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. So one of the entrepreneurs I have, Gen Z, amazing guy, Felix, he said to me, he said, "Look, I know all you say, I've had all the lessons, you mentored me for ages, but the reality of it is," I said, "Go on, tell me." He said, "This VC," because he was going for seed funding, "this VC is giving me a really hard time going, Felix, you're 26, for goodness sake." I said to him, "Really? And what did you say?" And obviously he didn't say the right things. So I said to him, "Look, Felix, let's be absolutely crystal clear about this. You need to go back and say, okay, I've spoken to my mentor, we've gone through everything, but one of the things she said is she needs you to understand that actually you should be really grateful you're working with me at 26, because there's a multimillionaire who's 11 when he exited called Andrew, and you could be working with Andrew and then you would really be in trouble. So be grateful it's me today, because it could be Andrew tomorrow." And that's worked like a dream. And he said to me, "But what would you have said to me if I come back and said, yeah, but he wasn't worried about that?" I said, "I would have told you about James, who is 5. Yikes," he goes. So basically what he's saying is, at 26, I'm an underachiever. This impatience isn't impatience. It's like, get your skates on, because Andrew and James are behind you. And that's exactly what I see. So Gen Alpha, who 16 to 6, they are not going to be, they don't put up with any idea that impatience is a problem. And people say to me, "Well, that's people you meet." And it's like, yeah, but they're like millions of people across the world. But they say, "No, I don't buy it. Usually I would say Gen Y, who's scared by the idea that they might have missed their boat, but particularly baby boomers, And they go, oh, I just don't believe you. And I said, okay, YouTube video, Greta Thunberg. That's what I'm talking about. Because I was in Davos in 2019 giving my speech on the future of the cybersecurity industry. It was really quite short. There isn't one. So I told them about 2 million people across the world and these voices of 36, 37 and under. And because it's like, well, I've got my spot. That's what I'm going to tell you about. And I've answered your question. So we're here. But she was there that year. And she was patient beyond endurance, I thought, given that I know what Gen Alpha's like. And she'd obviously thought very carefully about what she was going to say. She was here this year as well. I wasn't there because I was doing my G20 work. I was in the Middle East, but I tuned into her session to see what she'd say because I was astounded she went back after what had gone on. I was astounded she even bothered because I think that's hugely patient for Gen Z. And she basically went back to say, I've come back to say, I gave you a year and what have you done? You've made it worse. Don't expect me back again, and left. Yeah. And I thought that's exactly it. So I think that, we have to start thinking more laterally about this stuff. And I'm almost assimilated into that way of thinking now because I've been working with them all for, about 19 years. I've been doing this work, this whole research space is about 19 years in length. The company's only 10 years old though. And I think that for me, I see the energy around that. I don't tend to see it as impatience. But what doesn't happen and where the frustration sets in, when it sets into frustration, it can be negative, is that they haven't understood the collaboration element of it. So one of the ways in which I mentor Gen Alpha is I give them access to tools that they can't get any access to anymore that work their way. But also I encourage them to form groups of form around an idea or a concept or a problem or whatever it is they want to do, but to find their passion. And actually I'm looking to set up some hubs to do this physically. I mean, obviously not now, but one of the things I'm intending to do is any of the desks to have wheels on them, so that when people just are not in the right frame of understanding what you're saying, you just wheel yourself off to the next group, because actually they self-form. I love the way, it's sort of a little bit like the atoms in the Hadron Collider go. They self-form around an idea until you get the nucleus of what's actually going on. So I think one of the ways I can enable them is to give them something that allows them to be mobile in the space. So I have a very definite picture of how to bring them offline to collaborate, because it's quite hard for them to do that online, and they're very much an online cohort that hasn't had an opportunity to be offline, particularly in an entrepreneurial point of view. So that's I often, when that impatience sets in, it's because the business model's not right, but usually it's not a collaboration opportunity or perspective that they've got. And you should be frustrated and impatient if somebody's not allowing you to move forward. I think that's a natural response. It's a good response. But no, I love that energy. That's all the reason I get out of bed in the morning. So definitely don't drop that. Whatever you do, David, roll with that, because it keeps you moving and it keeps you motivated, and it keeps you driving towards putting your magic into the world and your contribution and developing your passion, as you're doing with these podcasts, to giving voices to ways of exploring it. So no, I think anybody that fears it or thinks it's a bad thing is because they're likely to lose out on it, and they're from a competitive landscape. Sorry about that, game's over, because that's just how it works, and I love that for it. And Gen Z they are like that, but Gen Z are very sanguine around the idea that there's some sort of battle to be done. No, I don't care. No battles to be done. I will ignore all your institutions that don't work, all of your ways of working that don't serve me and don't serve my generation. I just bypass them. I just blow on by. I don't even care about them. Whereas I think as a millennials, they've tried to negotiate that, and it's been partially successful. But then there's ways it's not, because we still ended up not tackling some of the real inconsistencies in the world, and from my own mission of inclusion, leave no one behind, leaving people behind are still being part of it. Whereas Jen said, don't tend to negotiate on that. It's part of what you do. Why are you even talking about it? So I find it very interesting the way in which that energy is so so useful. And when I presented the evidence to the G20 of the 2 million, I had 40,000 who actually were working in careers or were on a career path that would be in the empathy economy today. So if they actually were serving that economy and building that economy, they would be one of its future leaders. And that was quite interesting to see the response, 3,000 world leaders at Davos and then at the G20, because they were quite taken aback at the idea that the workforce had already sort of self-organized in that way. So, yeah. So no, absolutely, it's the best thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. It's funny, we were talking before we started recording, we were asking each other how our weeks have been, and I said, my week's been very busy, but I don't want to use the word busy because I've booked in so many of these interviews, and this is a 12-week project for me, but I'm actually getting all the interviews done in 2 weeks, because I'm like, why would I take 12 weeks when I do 2 weeks? I can do all my interviews in 2 weeks, have them ready to go, schedule them out, and then it gives me weeks to work on my other projects and other things that I want to do and other ways that I want to contribute. Whereas, yeah, you're right. Maybe if I didn't have that impatience of, well, I've got all my guests and I just want them in now and I want to do them now, I might have taken 4 weeks to do it or 6 weeks to do it. That time is not being used on other projects that I can work on. So
that allows for what I call serendipity to happen, because what I often find with Gen Z, a cohort, and Gen Alpha particularly as well, is that because of the way in which they approach things, other things happen serendipitously that wouldn't have been there. So effectively what nature abhors is a vacuum. So effectively you've created a vacuum. That's when the interesting stuff lands. So, as somebody that is not a physicist but has quantum physicists working for me, they could probably draw me an equation, and they certainly understand this better than I do. But with what you've just described, you've created a vacuum, and then that is definitely where interesting things happen, just because you've risked what I call risk winning, because you said, well, why would I do it like that? Who told me I needed to? Nobody. Let's get it done. And I think that energy is what we're talking about. I love it.
Yeah. I'm going to ask, I don't know how useful this question will be to the audience, but screw it, it's my podcast. I get to ask the questions. This is a millennial based question again, and there are millennial listeners, so it's not 100% irrelevant. There's two sides to millennials, right? And I think actually every generation you can say, these are the strengths of this generation, here's the weaknesses of this generation. And I look at millennials, and in some ways I see maybe 50% who follow all of the stereotypes of millennials. They're self-interested, they're self-centered, they expect everything to be handed to them on a plate. And then on the other half, I see people who I like to consider myself in. They're people who are incredibly purpose-driven. They have this drive, probably this impatience that we've been talking about. People a few years older than me, people a few years younger than me. I guess the question that is forming out of this, every generation has their strengths and their weaknesses. How do we get the best out of each of these generations? So for millennials, for example, how do we help millennials move away from the self-entitled label and indeed tendencies and behaviors that a lot of millennials have, and get them into this space of purpose and drive? And how can we actually do that across the generations?
Well, I think there's it's sort of depending where we're talking in time, there's a different answer. So my research has gone from 400 AD to 2400. So that's the spectrum that the research has covered.
You're doing future projections as well.
Yeah. So obviously they're off planet. This aerospace engineer got off planet to do them. Result. So it depends. But when you look at things across the millennia in that way, you actually get some very interesting answers when you then apply it to a cohort. So the cycles of change across those millennia are 400-year cycles. as it happens. I've no idea why it's 400, but roughly, and anybody listening to this who wants me to pick me up on it, yeah, okay, I've studied this sort of over 19 years. Roughly, the cycles of change are 400 years strong. So, for example, 800 years ago, the Magna Carta was signed, and that's the birth of our democracy and the Anglosphere and all the rest of it. And then 400 years ago, we had a falling out with our cousins across the water, and they got their own independence. So you get big changes like those two things. But it came home to me during the whole phenomenon that was the UK did a referendum, decided to leave Europe, and all hell let loose. And actually that polarized across the generations around an issue. And so what we found with that was it actually disrupted everybody's lives. And to me, which was interesting, because I'm part of that post-Brexit team for the UK, was interesting was that was a polarized conversation I was having in Iran and China and France. So the whole world was looking at this change that we'd voted for, irrespective of where you stood on that, and then we're envisaging a whole new future. And most people's response to that was, wow, that reset thing is really cool, isn't it? What on earth are you getting going? Why on earth are you making such a mess of it? And my federal colleagues in the US were the ones that sort of said it for me, that were they put them, they sort of hit the nail on the head. They said, do you know, there are things that have happened in these cycles that you talk about that are really life-changing. Like 400 years ago when we got away from an oppressor, and look how well we did. It's like, yeah, okay, let's leave the oppressor bits to one side. But I understand what you're saying. At a societal level, there's a fundamental change. And essentially, Brexit comes into that next 400-year cycle. And so humanity has these cycles of change, and obviously, the industrial age and all the rest of it, if you look at the historical patterns. And then within that, the cohorts deal with it so very differently. And the millennials are very interesting in a cohort because largely they've lived and been raised in an era of plenty, which has not happened before, not over such a long period of time. And because we literally stopped making war, and we had a whole generation that didn't know about the struggle with communism, doesn't know about the Cold War, has not been in the middle of a threat. And yet what happens now? The whole world is into a situation where no cohort can be unchanged by what's happening now. Yeah. And that to me has been the biggest shock to the millennials. And so people said to me, okay, before this whole thing gets going, where do you predict things are? I said, we will have a wave of overachievement going on, an absolute wave of it. People will be putting right in their lives all the things that they always meant to do. And we've had people doing social proof around, I'm exercising every morning with my family. Look, here we are. I'm getting dressed up. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. A frenzy of activity, which actually is what you do when you're in a sprint situation. And largely, millennials have been in a sprint situation. But what we've got now is a marathon. So my genuine concern is, what is your long-term view? Because for those of us, because I'm a boomer, for those of us who've been in a situation where we understand the world stops because it's under threat, we know we've got the long haul to deal with. And so the question that I ask the millennials now, whether you're dealing with it well or not, is your own mental health. Because actually, this is the sort of threat that all the other cohorts have largely experienced. You see, Generation Z, when they were coming to the end of their school days, was when the job for life finally died. And so as they were coming to 15, 16, they didn't have the university options where fees were free, where the jobs were plentiful. So they've been through their own, baptism of fire into the world is not there as your oyster. And it's not just for you to decide, because it's been decided around them. And that has given Generation Z some they've had to character build through that because it has been a very uncertain world. So they, but largely, are coping quite well with this because they're like, okay, it's bigger and it's worse, but we don't expect it to be all about us because that's not how we've experienced it. So I genuinely think that this crisis will be the making of millennials because it will be a marathon and it won't be a sprint. And we can run like crazy over the next few weeks. But if this is September, if this is December, if this is longer, you burn out. And so you can't keep up with that frenzy. And so it essentially, everybody that's treating this as a sprint will have to stop and think about who they are, what they do, and contribute in a very uncertain world where tomorrow just isn't known. And I think probably they're the only cohort that we have that haven't been through some experience like this before. But nature is an amazing thing. And I do think it'll be the making of the generation. I genuinely do. And I think it's lovely to have been in that almost bubble for being able to do what you as millennials have done. But arguably it was an artificial thing. And we have ended up with a world, in my view, that doesn't take care of the people on the planet. And I don't think that there's any doubt in my mind that, yes, there's a self-absorption thing that goes on with millennials, but they don't not care about everybody else. It's just that they come first. And they don't really see often beyond that. But you can't have that perspective in the world today because everywhere around you, you know that life is limited. And so a massive shock, but I do think it'll be the making of them. And the other thing is, the millennials are the parents of Gen Alpha. So even if we didn't have COVID-19, we were going to get to here. Yeah. Because anybody raising Gen Alpha is going, what on earth is going on? Of course, a lot of the mayhem online has been, I'm homeschooling for how long? Ooh, And so Gen Alpha have always been my hope for the millennials, because if you become a parent or an auntie or even you're babysitting your friend's child, you're like, yikes, what is this small person who doesn't subscribe to what we're talking about and has completely different values and sees it very, very clear? I think that's a culture shock. And the millennial parents that I know, they've gone, how on earth, what on earth? And haven't really known how to even reach out or where to start with it all. And that's what I've seen online over the last few weeks, and what our AEI engine has been understanding, that human emotion of underlying panic, quite frankly. What is this? Yeah. But that's because it's being approached from a sprint point of view. I just got to get through. And the conversation we've been getting back is, I'm getting through till Easter. And my response to that is, why? What's going to happen at Easter? And then I've said, well, what if it's I've had conversations this week, what if it's a long summer holiday? They're like, well, summer holidays are long. No, what if this is a long summer holiday? They're like, what, you mean September? I'm thinking, yeah, what if it's that? And so I think it's there's not much we can do about it either, is there? Because we understand that we have to do our part, which is largely sit on the sofa and make sure we're tuned into Netflix or whatever. That's our part. No, but that genuinely is it. We're largely most of us are in comfy places with the means of the way we live, which is a great way to live. We have good lifestyles. Lots of the world doesn't, and I know that I work in the developing world. But in the Western world, that's where we are. But we understand we have to just double down and stay in. And actually, that's been hard for people. That's been really hard. Spoke to one of my entrepreneurs this afternoon, and I said to him, where are you? He goes, I'm in rural place. And I said, yeah, but you don't even live in that country. He goes, I couldn't possibly live in that country. Do you know how many millennials I live with? I went, you are a millennial. He goes, I know, but at times like this, you don't want to be in their company. I'm like, coward. And he said, no, quite frankly, and he said he's left one of the big cities in a part of Europe and moved to somewhere rural, literally just moved out, taking the family. He said, because I couldn't cope. He said, I just can't envisage how bad it's going to be. So we just decided we weren't going to be there. I'm like, okay then. That's the first time I've heard that, though. That was like, really? Okay, I get it. Because it's like, how impossible is this going to be? Particularly if the millennials are raising Gen Alpha. That's a really tricky thing. So I think it'll be the making of the generation. I always thought Gen Alpha was going to be that anyway. But I think it'll be the making of the generation, because it really will be a focus on things that actually matter and the contribution we can make, because everybody will have to do something, because that's what's required of us. And, you know, we're connected anyway, you know, with our families, our friends, families, like, you know, you said when we started talking about, you got an online family event together around the YouTube quiz. And, you know, that was across the generations, wasn't it?
It was.
And so, and would you have ever done that before this?
No.
But that is the community I started talking this podcast on, about my Irish Catholic heritage, about we were part of a big brigade. There was 80 of us as cousins if we wanted to get together. We had our own little settlement going on. And so I grew up in that, but most people haven't. And so you effectively replicated how I grew up last night. And wasn't that fun? Wasn't that just great fun? And you knew you were contributing. And then you checked in with the family across the world. I just think that's amazing. You don't, as a human condition, you don't, you're not unaffected by that. It builds part of your character, and it will have made a big difference to the rest of the family, who perhaps, you know, this online thing, or that lady today, that groups and apps thing you're all doing. But they've gone, oh, it's quite good, this, isn't it? You know, I'm not sure she's going to use her phone. I'm fine with that. But you effectively brought your world to them. But in a sense, they brought their world to you, because actually it was a crossing of the generations. And that's why I think it's going to be the making of us all. I expected this transition to happen gradually, because that's what I planned for, because I didn't know about this situation. And I think what it will do is it will bring out the best in people, because we don't have many other options. We've got to find a way to make this right, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And go millennials out there, just go with the ideas and the creativity and the building community. I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. From this analysis, Jack, and you've kind of touched upon it already, we are at a transition point between two 400-year periods. Mm-hmm. What are some of the changes that you anticipate in this next period?
So I think that the institutions our world runs on are challenged at every level. It's almost like a handover of leadership is the way I see it. And I'll illustrate that with one of our projects. We supported initially a single entrepreneur in India. We now have 3 areas of India where we're supporting entrepreneurs. The first area where that single entrepreneur is now an entire village. The thing that's interesting about that project is it started in, you know, somebody reaching out across the world saying, I need your help, and then obviously me agreeing to mentor, but then finding a way to be able to help somebody else. So it's like build an entrepreneur so that they can train an entrepreneur, that type of thing. And now we've got an entire village, but that's in a culture where every single one of those people in the village has no options going forward because they're of the untouchable caste, which in theory doesn't work, you know, isn't part of it in India anymore. However, their options are very limited. Not now, they're not, because digitally, nobody knows who's on the end of that, you know, that connection. And they are doing the most beautiful work. They're so fulfilled. So when we visited India, we did a 3-week touring there, worked with the Indian government for a week, and then did 2 weeks visiting everybody in person. They just were just overawed by the idea of how far they come in a very short time. And I think that what will happen going forward is almost a personal empowerment. We talk about empowering other people, but I don't actually believe that's possible. I think we empower ourselves. And these people that I'm talking about here is just one example, but just one that says effectively you start with one person and then a whole organic community grows. And this is the 3rd time I've done this. So the other 2 times, the first one 250 people became 6.5 million. The second time, 2 people became 7 million. And then this time we're starting to grow from 27,000. And I'm intending to grow that support and to support 1 million entrepreneurs to make that change. And I think those sorts of initiatives will define it, because we'll all find our own internal courage and be prepared to be brave and bold, actually, about a future. Now, I would have said that before this crisis, but I'm certain of it now. Yeah. Because actually we will value what we can do and how we can contribute so much more at a personal level, because we'll know what the alternative is. But there are many people across the world that are disenfranchised by our society. And, you know, my passion has always been leave no one behind, having no idea how to do that. Just going, I'll set off, and then if I find, I just course correct and somehow it'll work. And now realizing that actually setting up a network of people that help people, and that 1 million strong network, means that there are 1 million entrepreneurs that are reaching out to a community across how many continents? I don't know, all of them possibly. But we will all do one little piece. So I think the future is very much, the reset that we're having here is very much like the web itself. When I started work with Tim Berners-Lee in 2009, only 18% of the world were online.
Really?
And, yeah.
Wow.
And so it was the World Wide Web's 20th anniversary. And he said, look, gang, he said, I can't do this because in 20 years, this is how far I've got. So get your workbooks, boots on. You're all web scientists. Make it happen. And so my team came out of the Royal Society, but we'll find a way to contribute. So what is it we can do? And I co-founded the data journalism industry. 2 of us did that. 7 million of us now across the world. That was my contribution, to be able to, because I'm Irish, as I've said, I'm from a long line of Seneschals, storytellers. I just tell my stories with data. So I told the world stories that mattered to me, and 34 million people responded with that. And then an industry grew. And so I know that this is possible, but I was thinking that this would have to grow organically and possibly slowly. But in 10 years, we've gone to only 18% of the world online, with, you know, the 200 of us that did what we did that day on the 12th of March 2009. Today, we've actually got over 50% of humanity online. And of course, humanity has mushroomed massively since then. We've had a population boom. So it's possible. And so I think what will happen is we'll find those organic, socially, community-driven, collaboratively driven networks that will form. But because of this crisis, I think they're forming already, you know, because people are going, well, you know, the impatience of us, though, is, right, we're here, we can get stuff done, because everybody now has to be connected like this. So what might we build? I mean, that's certainly how we are. But also other people are seeing those possibilities now and going, well, what can I contribute? So I think we've ended up in this crisis situation, which is far from over and lots to do, where people's sort of perspective is a different one already, which I thought would have to be done gradually. And my part was going to be 1 million entrepreneurs that I'm going to support with what I call cyber safe. Because with my background, no point in growing things online if you can't secure it, and not secure it the way the cyber industry wants to secure it, but the way we want it. You know, our what I call privacy preserving. It takes care of me and my community, and then security minded. Don't tell me you're going to lock everything down. That's not our world. Our world is an open, collaborative one. But that's a juggle. And so for me, I think that this whole thing has accelerated that world that I foresaw anyway. So does that mean, the question I've got in front of me at the moment is, does that mean the 400-year cycles are somehow going to be quicker? Now, history tells me back to 400 AD, that's not true. But it seems to me this is a big acceleration point. And there's a group of leaders I work with in Europe, and we call ourselves the Digital Enlightenment Forum. And that's because the Renaissance part of history was an Enlightenment period. And it's similar. It's similar where humanity's gone, wait, what? We got here? What is this? We've not done the right thing. So my contribution is to support entrepreneurs with all the things I talked about. And in fact, there's cornerstones. I've talked about courage a lot, but there's confidence, there's energy, there's insight, all part of that cyber safe proposition. And effectively, I'm going to devote my next 2 years to sharing that knowledge and supporting them, with what they need. And I think there's millions of people are going to do exactly the same. So then the only question is, well, how fast will we get to a fairer world, a more open and more collaborative world? And will it be in certain places and we'll connect it later? Will it be a movement that sweeps the way it can online, if cats and dogs can go viral, this can go viral. That's sort of how I look at it. And so the empathy economy, to my mind, is self-forming now as a result of this crisis. So I just receive things every day that just make me go, wow, that's amazing. And, what do you need, sort of thing. So I think that this is an enlightenment period. And I think of all the things we've talked about already, it actually gives a societal view, possibly for the first time, where technology is actually a foundation. So it's not about the technology. It's not about which tech giant's got how many billions or whatever. This is about the technology sort of enabling, as I call it, enabling this change. So we're using it as a tool, as a lever. And the technology itself is neither here nor there. Nobody cares. They just want the result, don't they? The outcome. So for me, that's what I think this is going to be about.
Yeah.
Just a great time to be alive. How amazing is that?
Yeah. I'd like to begin a transition, and I'd like to begin the transition by talking about terror, because I think that is maybe an emotion that we can start to relate to at the moment. And I'm aware we might not be able to have the fullest conversation on this topic, but I'd like to talk a little bit about your work into counterterrorism. What has been some of the trends that you've noticed in this area?
So there's clearly parts of the world where what often are really ancient philosophies see a struggle that has to be won. So some of the battles that we're seeing are civilizations and the philosophies they're built on and the cultures they're built on, looking to assert dominance because there has to be just one way. And that's, back to that command and control philosophy of, well, if I can own it, I can decide on it. And I think the horse has bolted on that one. Good luck. I think that won't work.
Yeah.
But because there are many more of us than there are of the people, these criminals that do what they do, and yet we still are fighting a battle on many fronts. What it depends on is that we, that have a different intention, don't collectively come together, don't find a way to collaborate. I've always taken the view that the web is it, but it's not necessarily a platform, it's not necessarily an app, it's just a means of us. Tim Berners-Lee said when I first met him on that day on the 12th of March, I created this for humanity to understand its own truth. That's what he did it for. Why did you do it? And in fact, the paper that I've seen, the paper that he wrote to ask permission to do this in CERN, has a little pencil mark in the right hand corner that says vague but interesting. And that was the basis on which you got the go ahead to do it. Just fabulous, fabulous. But the reality of it is he understood that if we could use technology where people could then bring their talents, and of course, some of those talents are not talents that are anything other than the intention is for a community that does harm. And so you can't appeal to people who have a different philosophy. But equally, we need to understand that these people are disenfranchised from the world we've created. But to me, it's more, is communism going to dominate? Is capitalism going to dominate? I think the answer is neither, because the world we're creating actually is a meld of it all, where we coexist. But there's some remaining issues to be solved, and that's why we see the escalation of it. Because if you can't find a way to do it any other way, you will survive. And we would do that as much as anybody who's trying to push through the system. And I'm not excusing what goes on, but I got involved in this because I was in the European Commission the day that Paris was attacked, and I came home from that experience thinking, well, okay, this is a different world now. If we can have those sorts of attacks right here in front of me, then actually I'm involved anyway. And so what do I do? And so I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we have to include people. That's sort of where I came to setting FlyingBinary up with an inclusion agenda. But I do believe we have to give people a chance to prosper. And the idea that as a cybersecurity industry, what we do is lock them all down, and we just, every threat there is, we just shut it down. I mean, there's no way that's going to work. So what I've said across all of this, and my approach is, this is risk. We have to decide which risks are unacceptable that we do something about and make some different choices. And my philosophy or direction or focus on that is community. In this particular risk, what is the community need? What do we need to do for ordinary people, all of us? And those are the choices we make, which is quite selfless. And the world isn't selfless, I understand that. And actually, the study I did for the G20 that I said about the 2 million voices, we had a dominant voice of young men who were feeling very disenfranchised, and as I said at the beginning, have been radicalized as part of this process. But they're the very young men that were telling me exactly what needed to change. So actually, unless we build a means of having a conversation that is inclusive, that includes all those voices, we won't solve it. And so the way I'm tackling what we do as a company is to say we build community. That's how we defeat this threat we faced. We can't outrun it. We can't outgun it. We can't, you know, that's just madness. Nobody can lock it down. It's not the way it is, because we're fighting a philosophy here. So either we have to offer a better alternative, or we just have to give in to that, because there's going to be, it seems to me that the 400-year cycles come with great change. And the reason for that is we reach a nexus point where something has to change. And of course, this particular crisis has forced that issue. But we would have kept trying to outrun before this happened, whereas it is affecting everybody. And so it's actually our response to this crisis that will determine it. But if we come out of this and we don't listen to those voices, we don't understand what we might do to change things, then guess what? Nothing will change. But my honest answer to it, and the plan I put down for the G20 was, a community defeats this problem. But it has to be based on that collaborative approach. But it doesn't necessarily have to be open. I know every millennial listening to this will scream at the recording, but open allows this threat-based attack to be there. So collaborative and shared, not collaborative and open. And that's somebody who created that open movement back in 2009 saying, yeah, but it doesn't get us to where we thought it would go. So collaborative and shared, and how can we share what we have in order that everybody gets what they need to be part of it. And that's why my cyber safe entrepreneurs comes from, because we have to progress in a way of building online so that we are knowledgeable at how we build online, but also we have to do that by building a community that's self-supporting. And that's not something that, you know, anybody can attack, because, well, you'd have to find us first, you know, because with the tech that we build, it's not visible to anybody. So it'd be a little bit like chasing a ghost. So I think that we have lots of things to do. This is by no means solved. I'm not saying that, you know, there's a nirvana just around the corner, because there's just not. And it will. The thing I've said to people really since this whole thing struck is, it's going to take all of us. So what's your magic? What's your superpower? How can you contribute? Because quite frankly, the web is a resource that allows everybody to do a little bit, and then everybody prospers. And people have said, but I don't know the answer to that. Okay, then be either an entrepreneur or work for an entrepreneur, because those are the people that will say, I don't know how, like I just did, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know where I'm going. Are you coming with me? And so very many people who've taken that advice have worked for entrepreneurs, me for example, and then have gone on to be an entrepreneur, or have gone on to be somebody else. But it's actually crystallized people's perspective and help them understand what they contribute. So if you're not an entrepreneur, and you can't imagine how you would be, go work for one or create a service or product that entrepreneurs need, because those are the people that will find a way, make a way. That's just who we are. It's part of our DNA. And some great panel debates about, can you make an entrepreneur, how are they born? Well, they're born through circumstance. I'm not from a family of entrepreneurs, but my circumstance did give me any options, so that was my answer. But I think that's really where I'd say, because often there's a sense of purpose missing, and people are now focusing on that purpose, is the way I see it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, and not to get into the pros and cons of this particular discussion, do you think something like blockchain is the type of technology that you're talking about in terms of in terms of a shared community preventing the criminal behavior? I'm guessing that's a no then.
Do you know, anybody who knows me will go, oh, David, you didn't ask her the blockchain problem. You didn't ask her that. So what I will say is distributed ledger technology is part of a solution. Blockchain is a form of that is not the answer. I know that specifically because in my work I have explored that at planet scale. But distributed ledger technology, that's another matter. So this whole approach is in its infancy, and some of the problems we've talked about, it throws a real light on. It throws a light on what it's trying to do, and it throws a light on the criminals that it brings people together from both sides of the coin. And yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a problem, wasn't it, both sides of the coin. But it brings people together from both sides of the sort of argument, and supposedly, federates a new idea. I do think that as I said before, the institutions that form our society, they have had their day. There is a regeneration to be done. In my mind, there's no doubt about that. No one technology is the answer, but I can tell you technology is the answer. So for most people, they will not necessarily think about the things that keep me awake at night, which is the ethical way in which we use technology and who it serves, and how we ensure that it's inclusive and we don't disinherit people. But it is a mixture of that deep technology that we build. It is that, because quite frankly, some of the biggest problems we have in the world can be solved by that collaborative approach with deep technology. No doubt in my mind, we're doing it. It's, top 10 innovator in the world becomes from, my award from that was because we've made that change, and you can do that. But again, we do that in a partnership model. It's not us owning the entire 9 yards. So I think that from a DLT point of view, it's part of a solution. It's very specific to certain use cases. It's great in some use cases. As a silver bullet, which is, I must say, is a sort of somehow millennial nirvana thing. I haven't quite ever got to the bottom of that. It's like, what is it about this technology that lights your fire and you think it's going to solve every problem? But there is a thing going on there, and I haven't understood it. Maybe that's another discussion. But it won't be one technology, and it's very much the industrial Internet of Things, which is what we build for, is a blended set of technologies, and so it's where the entire world is connected and it serves us. That's what the empathy economy is in essence, and I'm sure DLT is part of that. I'm convinced it is, but not as some sort of overarching framework that the world sits on. No, I don't think we would consume the resources of the planet if that's what it was. If for no other reason, it's a no. But I don't think it's matured enough to understand it. But in the use cases I've seen it work, it absolutely does facilitate it. But it is only part of a value chain. It's not across an entire spectrum, because it just isn't. That's not what we would use it for. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer. Yeah. But I can't believe you asked me the blockchain question. Amazing. This shows this is unscripted because you asked me that question. I love it. Because what you didn't see, dear listener, was me with my head in my hands when he said it. Oh, no.
We were discussing a climate of fear, talking about the counter-terrorism stuff, and I'll come back to that specifically slightly later, or at least I very much hope we will. But that was kind of my attempts to transition into talking about our current situation, the coronavirus and isolation and the various precautions that come with it. And I've got a few areas I'd want to explore with you here, and probably a few more that are going to pop up that I didn't expect based on how this conversation's been going so far.
Which is brilliant,
Yeah.
so go with it.
First of all, how is coronavirus affecting you and what you're doing just now?
So that's the curious thing. So over 10 years, we've come with tech propositions to solve business problems, usually by implementing a new business model, because the commercial models fall out of that. And we've had no's on a significant basis throughout those 10 years. And then roughly 3 weeks ago, the whole world decided we were right. Right. So people that have absolutely refused to discuss this one more time, Jacqui, beating a path to our door. So I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah.
For me, so our team's distributed for what it does and for how it is, and because we work across the world. But I'm often, in the last couple of years, I'm based in the Middle East, I'm based in Europe, and I'm based in the UK, and I revolve across those landscapes to do the work I do, because it very much is at a global level and then focused on a particular, say, nation state who, you know, we need to understand something, we need to develop something with, etc. So for me personally, being at home is quite refreshing, because it's like, oh, home, yes, I vaguely remember this place, and just been all over the place. And my husband comes with me often because he's our CTO, and so we'll just base ourselves somewhere else. We're digital nomads, like lots of the people who do what we do, and so we just go, oh well, today we're in, I don't know, Petersburg in Russia, because that's where we happen to be doing what we do, and that's where we're going to be. So for me, it's just odd to be at home. I like it, you know, it's a good thing, but I just happened to get out of the Middle East in time, just because I was due in the US, came back by then and was going to go back, but obviously didn't get to leave. But some of our folks chose to be based in Dubai and effectively stranded there. So I think that for us personally, we don't really see a lot of change, because other than not having to get on a 787 to go somewhere, you know, we're virtual. And now all of our client base 2 weeks in is virtual too.
Yeah.
The people that for 10 years have been, no way, Jose, are we ever going to do that? Have been like, okay, how quickly can you make this happen? So I find that fascinating. And particularly one of our long-term clients, we've been working with them 7 years, and we kept saying to them, we want to deliver this virtually, we want to deliver it virtually. And we had a series of sessions booked, and they said to us, like when we did the proposition for 2020, they said, will you just take that line off? We want to do it virtually. And we're like, no, because someday, maybe. Anyway, they sort of said, well, you know, this in-person thing, we can't do it. Could you do it virtually? Like, well, actually, we could. So I think that I find that very interesting, and the team works in a distributed way anyway, so it's not disrupted us. And all of our stuff, because we built for the industrial internet things, everything's in the cloud, secured obviously, and no dependency on the US privacy shield, but all in the cloud, so we can work anywhere in the world, unless it's somewhere without internet connection, in which case that's a problem.
Yeah.
But so for us, we've done, you know, we've really been focused on helping clients and helping our entrepreneurs shuffle what they do. So lots of people that we do work with, and as part of Cyber Safe Entrepreneurs, their business models just died overnight. So we've spent a lot of time saying, okay, well, what's the pivot? As a company, we've pivoted many times, so we're the pivot experts. So we've spent a lot of our time going, okay, the pivot is, and then, you know, setting people off. So I expect that to go on for a good few weeks yet, because this flipping business models is not simple, and there's a lot to consider. And then obviously you've got to build a commercial model on the back of it. So essentially, we're going to ship some of Cyber Safe Entrepreneurs early, because people are actually going to need it. So that's sort of how it is for us.
Yeah. Do you have any insights into what people can do just now to get through this current situation and to overcome it?
So I think the thing I'm most concerned about, I think I did briefly say earlier, is people's mental well-being.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about that. So we have a new project we're about to start. We're looking at acute mental health provision for our young people between the ages of 25 and 8. And we're actually going to put tech in their hands because they've got to a place where their mental well-being is needs to be clinically assessed and what have you. So I'm because of the work in that area, I'm genuinely concerned about people's well-being. So when we finish this podcast, I'm going to go live on my Facebook page with part of my courage, I don't even know what to call it, but part of what I do to build my courage in the work I do, I'm going to go live on that. I'm just going to share it. So what I picked up this morning that helped me, I knew what I was facing this morning, not this interview, but I had some interviews on that were quite difficult.
Talking about
and
blockchain again, Christ.
So I knew this morning was going to be a tricky thing. And so I got up this morning going, okay, well, I need to dig in and do courage. So I'm actually going to share that on my Facebook page. And I think that for me, I'm bothered about, so particularly the cohort that we work with, sort of the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but obviously Millennial and Gen Y, which we work with because it's part of it. There's a almost a distraction thing that comes in, where if you can get out and about, you can almost, it's like your busy thing that you said, I'm busy, but actually not really busy. But when you're confined, you're not busy. And so then you start, like I said, popping up online all over the places. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and there's frenzy almost. So I am particularly thinking that people, I'm worried about what people need to do in terms of just being still and understanding where they're at from their own well-being. So I'm actually going to read some poetry that is from one of my favourite poets, from an Irish poet who's very revered in my country. And I'm going to read some poetry. And John's words are wisdom around courage and actually what it feels like to build courage. And he has words that I couldn't write. He's just amazing. And I think that one of the things people need to do is find that stillness, whatever that is. So it's not frantically doing 2K more than you've ever run, and it's not, joining everything online you've ever had. It's actually being still. And the reason I say that is because our young people and the work we do, the AI we've built for that is called the Social Guardian. We have a cohort of young people where anxiety is a constant companion, and that's because people are worried about the future. And in today's climate, who isn't? And then there's a cohort that deal with depression, and they're worried about the past. But what we find is if you're centered and you're in the moment, in the present, then actually you just deal with it in the box that says the day. And so one of the things I find is some of my work terrifies me. I will be really honest about that. I literally deal with what's in front of me today. And then every Sunday, I take the day. Now, my Sunday might happen to be a Tuesday because that is just the way my week went, or I've been on flights and they got delayed or whatever. But I take a day every 7 days that's mine. And I do something that is right brain, creative. So one of the things that I will be doing this weekend is I'm a mixed media textile artist, because actually I have to have something that isn't what I've talked about, because I would just go mad, quite frankly. So I'm a mixed media textile artist, and one of the things my niece said to me is, but one of the things I was thinking about was, Mum can't have flowers because can't get to the shop to get flowers, and I said, we'll make flowers. So I'm actually going to assemble craft materials. We're going to make some flowers out of craft materials so that she can learn how to give flowers to her mum every week or month or whatever. And so we're going to make spring flowers, and we're going to make peonies as it happens, because that's what I've assembled, and that happens to be my favourite flower. So I think that there's a centering activity, which I have 4 shamans that support the work I do. And they said, that's just meditation, Jacqui. yeah, but I haven't found the knack of meditation. I haven't made that work for me. So it's creating those delta brainwave activities where I'm focused right in the moment, exactly what I'm doing. And some people can do that with meditation. I haven't worked out how to do that yet. I've tried. I'm still trying. But in the moment, I will do something creative. And people say to me, but I'm not creative. And I say, well, when was the last time you tried? You know, because it's about that right brain activity, because, you know, you need to center yourself, and often the left brain is where the fear and all the rest of it resides. So what can we do to bring that into the present and say, I'm just dealing with today? Because quite frankly, none of us can affect how this goes. I know that's probably horrible to say. And it's like, oh, that makes it worse, Jacqui. But the reality of it is we can do our bit, but we will all do our bit, and that's the outcome. But we can't individually change it. So there's a fabulous book, which used to be on my bookshelf here, but isn't, called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And when you get to the end, it says it's all small stuff. So stop, you know, the minutiae is what, you know, robs us of the present, robs us of our well-being. So I think for me, I say to people, you know, carve that time out. I'm a lark, so I get up early. That's when I do my affirmations, I do my gratitude journal. In fact, I've just won an award, and one of the things they asked me was about self-care. And that's the first time with any of the awards I've ever been asked about self-care. But I think find the things that allow you to look after you, not what your girlfriend or your husband or your children do for you, but you for you. So I think finding out what's your passion and what you need, and that self-care is absolutely number one job right now, because I think we're all going to struggle if that's not what we do. So self-care is really my answer. What you're doing for yourself today, and if you haven't got anything on your list, make a list. You know, so I started this whole thing off about 20 years ago when I started in this work that I was doing, and I sat down and made a list of 500 things, and then I thought, well, I'll not run out, and so I've explored. I suppose again that's back to the exploring thing. What is it you like to do? You know, are you a sporty person? Are you a creative person? Are you a musical person? What might you do? Might you create a podcast series? I don't know.
We've touched a couple times upon fear and climates of fear, and I think this is something that we've really got at the moment. I just saw one of my connections on LinkedIn was saying that a survey has just come out, and they found that 35% of the UK public at the moment are feeling overwhelmed by the news and the information and the situation. And I know I've got a member of my in-laws who I was talking about earlier, and they're waking up 6 a.m, putting the news on and leaving the news on until they go to bed at 10. And I'm like, don't do that. That is so bad. No. That is so unhealthy. How do you think that we can get through this climate of fear and panic that's surrounding us just now?
Well, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. The AI intervention for acute mental health conditions that I was talking about actually is something we call social guardian, because what it's going to do is the AI that learns about human response to things. Before you access something online, it's going to tell you what the rest of the world thinks of it. So something you're going to go, oh, well, I need to know about this. What's this news thing? Actually, this has made the rest of the world cry. So don't do it. Yeah. And the reason for that is because our young people, they're 25 and under, they've grown up with this instant access to everything, always on world. And actually, there isn't a way to turn it off. And when you get to an acute mental health situation, you don't even know it's a problem. And so one of the things that we're building with this new tech is to put that in their hands so they can say, well, I'm a member of humanity, and what does the world think about it? Oh, I thought it was going to make me happy. It's made everybody else cry. For the first time ever, interrupt their neuron pathway to say, that's not going to do what I think it's going to do. And so I think, like with, the 9/11 and all, and that time when there was another uncertainty in the world, the obsession with it is I might miss something. Well, quite frankly, I just turn it off, and I know they'll ring me if they need me, and they genuinely will ring me if they need me. But it's like, we just can't, we're not that important. We've all got our thing to do. but we're not integral to it. But if you're feeling happy about watching the news all day, and you get up in the morning, you're cheery, at the end of the day you're still cheery, then probably it's all right for you. I would argue it isn't, but you could probably say, I'm going to leave it there, Jacqui, I'm ignoring you. But if that's not your experience, then actually something has to change, because that's just logic, isn't it? And so I always advise like a controlled access to it, because it just becomes an activity in itself. That's part of people's business. So I do a period in the morning and a period in the evening before I eat dinner, and then after that it's off, unless there's an emergency. Of course, then that changes things, because actually I don't need to know. I just don't need to know. And even if I did know, I couldn't do anything about it. But what I do need to care about is what I need. So definitely going for a walk instead of switching on the news. But I have the actual scientific evidence to say it is making people ill. And now we're going to help our really experienced clinicians support our young people who can't get out of that state they're in, because that always on has made them unstable and unwell. And one of the things I want to do that work for is, that's obviously an intervention to help those young people recover, but I want to be able to package that so I can give it out to people saying, if you looked at this, what would it tell you? That might make you angry. If you're already feeling angry, why would you do it? But it's a way of, it's interesting to me that young people didn't view having a robot tell them that as a problem. They were happier to deal with an AI giving them that feedback than a clinician of 20 years experience telling them. So in some respects, the conversation you're having, what I find is people will take that from an AI that they won't take from a human, because it's like, well, I don't think you're right, because this is me, I'm an individual. But if the rest of the planet thinks it's going to make them cry, you're the one person on the planet it doesn't make cry, why would that be? Yeah. And I think you sort of have to challenge those sort of assumptions. And right here, right now, in this crisis scenario, we have to be very protective of ourselves, because we do influence a wider community. Back to community for me, other people in your household, your wider family. If we look, I'd rather we self-care for ourselves, but often it's better if we self-care based on how we might be called on to help somebody who needs us. If we're not looking after ourselves, we're not going to be of much use. So if you can't, there's some people who work better doing it in case they're in need for somebody else than they do looking after themselves. I would say that that's still a problem, but at least it's not, oh, it doesn't matter, the news on all day is fine. So that's the way I would approach it. But self-care is hugely important always. But right now, we really have to be quite vigilant about what we are consuming. What we're literally looking at, hearing, experiencing even. We've got to be really careful about that. And the other thing I would say is, have you had any fun today? And if you haven't, definitely stop what you're doing and find something that's fun. Yeah. So like me doing my making peonies with my niece on Sunday, that's what I'm going to do, because that just will be fun. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't it be? Yeah. Well, it will be for me. I mean, if you're not mixing me with textile artists, you don't care. But for me, that's creative and it's fun. Yeah. Based on our conversation so far, I think this next question could actually stimulate an entire interview in itself. Oh, right. Go for it. I'm loving it already. Do you think there are any opportunities in the current situation? That's such a good question. I'm going to answer it with a story, because I am a cyniche. An old man was sat on a rock outside of a city, and a young man came to him and said, I'm going into that city. Should I go into that city? Are there any opportunities in that city? And the old man said, where did you come from? And he named the city. And he said, were there any opportunities there? And the young man said, no. He said, I don't think you'll find any opportunities there. And another young man came to him and said, I'm going into this city. I'm looking for opportunity. Do you think I'll find it there? And the old man said, where did you come from? He told him. And he said, and were there opportunities where you came from? He said, yeah, there were loads, but I just thought I'd try, I want to experience the world. He said, it'll be your oyster. The opportunities there. It's a perception. opportunities are perception. But I think I want to be really careful about this next bit. What I am seeing is opportunistic behavior. That's the competitive behavior.
Yeah.
That's not community. That's not what I'm talking about. And so that's not the empathy economy. But opportunity is, how can I contribute? My federal colleagues say, how can I serve? That's quite an American culture thing. But how can I contribute? What difference can I make? What one or several things can I do to make the world a better place? And in my terms, what I, as an entrepreneur, live by is be the change I want to see. What do I step up to be that change that I can contribute, what the world needs to see? So I think there's a really fine line between opportunistic and opportunity. And there's a cohort of people who've just dived in on this. Obviously, we talked about cyber criminals already. But there are other entrepreneurs who've dived on this and gone, I'm going to monetize this.
Yeah.
That's not what I think. That's not opportunity as far as I'm concerned. And there are a cohort of people who go, but my entire world has just been crashed and burned. So there's no opportunity. That's your perspective, where, if that's what you believe, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, you won't see it. But then there are many people who are saying, well, it's not what I did yesterday, but it's a difference I can make today. And, I've been on a WebEx with entrepreneurs this afternoon to teach them how to present professionally when they're used to walking into a room, and to do the engagement with an audience when it's like you and I, and that's a different skill to what they have, but they know that what they normally present to their clients who are terrified of trying to organize a big online anything, and they want to make sure they can deliver what that client needs, but they don't have those skills. So the opportunity's there. It's a question of what might you need to do to be prepared to maximize that, to really engage with it. But that doesn't mean to say for the next year do a load of courses that are free, because that's not the same thing either. Because it's actually about outcomes. This is not about being busy, going back to what you said again at the beginning. This is about what contribution can I make. And at the end of it, I would say be bold, because actually, if fortune favors the brave, in today's world, brave is the only option we've got. And so be bold and be brave. And I realize that takes courage. I'm not in any way saying that, putting yourself out there, being authentic, saying, I think this will serve, to be told, no, it won't. It defines us how many times we get up, not how many times we get knocked down. That, we're again, and so I suppose in a nutshell, if your glass is half empty, then you will see no opportunity. But if it's always half full, and then often it's like, if you're listening to yourself or you're listening to the news, but you're not listening to somebody who's got that belief setting or that mindset setting. I don't mean go and get yourself a coach. I mean, hang out with folks that think like this. And there's sort of so many resources online to find your crowd, find your tribe, find the people that think as you do. Because everybody's going to be needed to pull us out of this. This is a massive job. And so in the same way, BernersLee said to me on the 12th of March, 2009, get your work boots on. There's a huge job to be done. The opportunity is there because there's a huge job to be done. And if we all put something of ourselves in it, what kind of world can we be when we come out of it? So I think it's a massive deal. But opportunistic has really it's not resonated with me, and I've been quite dismayed of some of the stuff I've seen.
Yeah, me too. It's quite disgusting, actually, some of the stuff that I've seen. Yeah.
So I think the era of the guru is dead. I think this has killed the guru. It's like, I'm sorry, you're not my guru. I don't know what that's about. I'm quite a dragon, me, so people don't approach me with that. They're like, oh, I'm telling her, she'll tell us where it's at. But the opportunity is definitely there. But it's not like a rock in the road. There's the old adage of the streets of London paved with gold. Yeah, only if you actually know to sweep them or to create the service or to create the product. So it's not waiting there lying for you to pick up. You've got to get that right brain activity shifted, understand what your talents are, meet with what needs doing, and then out of it is an idea. And then again, final piece, if you're not entrepreneurial and you're thinking, or you're working for an organization that perhaps isn't working, then we have I do a lot of work with organizations where the intrapreneur, it's that mindset, it's that way of thinking about things. And, often we do that in our personal lives. We don't necessarily apply it to our career. And right now, it's pretty much the thing that's going to dig us out of this mess, as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. So I tried to keep it brief. I'm not sure how short that was.
I'm thinking of trying to bring all of what we've been talking about so far to a close, Jacqui. And normally I do this with a couple rounding off questions. I actually want to do something different for this particular discussion.
Okay.
I actually want to give you the opportunity to ask the last question. Now, what do I mean by this? I'm thinking back to very early on our conversation where you're talking about, and correct me if I've forgotten the terminology, you talk about asking wicked questions.
That's
right. Wicked questions?
Yeah, that's right.
What is a wicked question that you think our audience should be asking themselves?
That is such a good question. You're very good at this, So a wicked question defines the unknown unknown. That's what it actually is. We can't know it now, and we have no knowledge that we can leverage. So unknown unknown equals the need to ask a wicked question. So I would say to the audience, what's your wicked question based on where you are today? Because given the world has to reset itself, is that reset going to mean you're going to stay where you are, doing what you're doing your path forward? Or is this the chance to say, well, there's always been this thing I've wondered about. Can you pursue that as an alternative alongside, while the world is in its mayhem? Is that something you can look to? So my request of anybody is, your wicked question is, what's the thing you've not had the courage to explore? What lack of confidence has stopped you doing that? Because all these things can be changed. So my 4 pillars of cybersafe: courage, confidence, energy, insight. Energy sometimes is, am I eating the right things? Am I drinking too much alcohol? But mostly it's, am I getting enough sleep, good quality sleep? Get some good quality sleep. And then insight. And insight is that stillness piece that I said about, am I genuinely giving myself a pause, a chance to pause and be in that moment, however I channel that delta brainwave activity, to say, what does it mean to me? Because I think that there's an opportunity for us all individually to ask that wicked question of ourselves. And then depending on your intention is going to be, whether the outcome's positive or negative for the world. But I know that many more of us are the positive influence on the world. We may not be doing the right things, or we're doing the self-care. We may not be engaged in activities where are delivering a positive benefit. And if all of that you go, well, that's all very well, Jacqui, I still don't know what it is, then who can you help today? Because oftentimes we take ourselves out of ourselves and the answer appears. It's when we're internally looking at this stuff, we drive ourselves likely insane trying to answer that question. So if the wicked question you ask yourself doesn't come to anything, then the wicked question I have for you is, who can you help today? What small thing, large thing can you do where you can be the change the world needs to see? And if you don't know what that means, the phrase is, be kind. I said it earlier. So who can you help today or tomorrow or next week where you can be kind? Who could you do? And I don't think there's anybody listening to this that isn't capable of answering that question. So the be kind, who can you help today, is your wicked question, if all the other things I said didn't resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's my answer.
Jacqui, for the audience today who have been listening to this and the variety of things that we've talked about, and they want to find out a little bit more about who you are, what you do, some of the projects that you've been talking about, where would you direct people to go in order to do so?
So I share everything I can share publicly on LinkedIn, because we've replaced LinkedIn, and when we all leave, if you're connected with me on LinkedIn, you can come with us. I also have a Facebook page called Cybersafe Entrepreneurs. and the current issues of the day and things I need to alert you to, which the cyber criminals always know about because that's their reason that they've got up in the morning. That's tips, tools, and tech is on that page. And then tonight, for the very first time, I'm going to be doing a live on that page about courage, because I'm moving what we're doing as a company towards launching CyberSafe in a cyber-safe place, i.e. our tech, but I'm focusing for this period on courage, because I think that the foundation of what moves us on the other end of the COVID-19 tunnel is courage. That's what gets us from now to here. So I'll be doing a lot on the CyberSafe page on Facebook around courage. And so that's what, and I'd love to, and everywhere that you see me, it's generally Dr. Jacqui. I don't quite know why it's like that, other than what somebody said to me, because I asked that question at Excel when I was there a couple of weeks ago, and they said, because Professor's scary. Okay, then. I didn't know that. I didn't actually know that was scary. So I'm quite happy to be called Dr. Jacqui, but that's where I tend to be. It tends to be Dr. Jacqui Taylor, but it tends to be Dr. Jacqui. But one thing I would say is, if you do come find me, say hi and tell me that you heard via this podcast, because I think what David's doing is amazing. And it's lovely to be, because I'll be able to say, such a body popped up and said hi, and they're one of your listeners. And I think between us, we're creating that new community, and all the other leaders that you've got coming on the podcast, you're creating that community of change by doing this, by giving listeners a chance to hear some new voices that may or may not resonate with them. But every time one of them connects with me, effectively, you're building that community by doing what you're doing. And that is what I think of as people, people have their superpowers. This is David's. So yeah, if you do connect with me, say this is where you heard of me, because I'd be delighted to share that with David, and I'm sure I'd be thrilled to know.
Absolutely, yeah, please do so. We've mentioned many C words today: coronavirus, collaborate, courage, community. The C word that's really stood out for me in terms of yourself, Jacqui, today has actually been curiosity. I've really noticed your curiosity in what can we do, what can we find out, what does this tell us about the future, the past, this group, this generation. So I'd like to really mark that and thank you today for your curiosity and bringing the fruits of your curiosity into our discussion today. And it's proven a very rich discussion because of, I think, that curiosity.
Oh, that's brilliant. And do you know why that's such a compliment? Because that's the word that defines Gen Alpha. So now Gen Z will know I've been completely assimilated by Gen Alpha, which nobody's actually said to me before. So thank you for that. So there'll be some entrepreneurs thinking, oh, crikey, now we're in trouble if Gen Alpha's assimilated her. But yeah, I do think the world is a fascinating place, but us as humans have such a fascinating contribution to make, and it's as we're connected as part of that community that the magic genuinely does happen. And that is what gets me out of bed in the morning, and often means that I can't go to sleep because I'm too excited. So thank you for that, David, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks ever so much. I just need to ask you about that picture behind you, because I've been staring at it now for a little while, and it's like, I need to know what that is, whether this is on the recording or not.
Why not? It's a bit of fun. So my wife went to Cuba 5 years ago, and that is a picture of Che Guevara himself on the Cuban flag from Cuba.
Right, and is somebody's hand painted that, or it's a... I can't tell whether it's a textile or a painting or what it is.
You know what? I've actually never looked at it in that much detail before, but now that you've said that, I think it is actually a hand painting.
It does look like it, doesn't it? And there's a Cuban flag, which I can see, but then there's a blue flag with a star. I can't quite see what that is.
Yeah, so there's the Cuban flag. It's got a peace
You're going to have to
sign
ask
on
her now,
it.
aren't you?
Yeah. Funny how you can have things and you just kind of take them for granted and take them as part of
there's
normality.
Well, I'm a mixed media text artist, and a lot of symbolism in that, and I just think it's been really well crafted, and it's quite an eye-catching piece. So yeah, you can always ping me later and let me know the story.
Yeah, we'll do.
But it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Jacqui, for coming on.
Okay, take care. Thanks. Bye.
To continue to help you through this isolation period, I've decided to open up my Author Your Life Academy for free for the next 3 months. Author Your Life is my online educational community where you can access training sessions, workshops, and question and answers, and connect with other people around the world who are going through this situation and trying to make the best of things. The Academy normally costs $27 a month to subscribe, but for the next 3 months, I'm going to open that up for free. Essentially, you're getting a 3-month free trial of the platform. To access the Author Your Life Academy, go to authoryourlife.org/academy, and when prompted, enter the code CORONA in block capitals. Yes, what else would the code be? CORONA in block capitals, and that will take your $27 subscription down to zero for the next 3 months. The Academy is where I'm going to be focusing a lot of my content during this difficult time. It's where I'm trying to bring people together to help and support each other as we go through this period of isolation, of fear, of uncertainty. I hope the Academy is something that will be able to help you too during this situation. So if you want to come in and join us, as I said, go to authoryourlife.org/academy, and when you sign up, enter the code CORONA, and that will give you 3 months for free. It's my gift to you to try and help and support during this time as best I can. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.